Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Nick Riggle and Todd Cashton. Thanks for joining us. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and we're honored to have the robust support of dozens of schools, nonprofits, corporations, families, and individuals from across the country. We're committed to our vision of an informed and compassionate community, and will achieve that vision by presenting fresh ideas that elevate minds, expand hearts, and make the world a better place. We have hundreds of videos of past events archived on our YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Nick Riggle is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of San Diego and the author of On Being Awesome, How Not to Suck. He regularly lectures at top philosophy departments internationally. Most of Nick's writing is about art and life and how they interact. For example, he writes about personal style, how beauty can change who we are or what we care about, how to pursue aesthetic value in our lives, personal ideals, and self-presentation, among other things. Nick is a former professional rollerblader and has traveled the globe skating in numerous demos, shows, and competitions. We are thrilled to welcome Professor Todd Cashton back to FAN. He's quickly become a favorite of ours. He was awarded the 2013 Distinguished Early Career Researcher Award by the American Psychological Association. He is one of the world's top experts on the psychology of well-being, psychological strengths, mental agility, and social relationships. His research has been featured in hundreds of media outlets, including multiple articles in the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, and Forbes. As a professor of psychology at George Mason University and a leading educator to the public, Professor Cashton, we call him Todd, translates state-of-the-art science for practical application to improve our everyday lives. He is the author of 5 books, maybe 6, 5, he'll correct me when he comes on in just a second, including Curious, The Upside of Your Dark Side, and most recently, The Art of Insubordination, How to Dissent and Defy Effectively. And now let's welcome Nick Riggle and Todd Cashton.
Thank you so much, Lonnie.
Thanks so much for having us. Yeah, thanks for having me, Lonnie.
If there's any indication of the awesomeness of FAN, I think it's seeing right before we popped on, you have Condoleezza Rice's name and then Nick Riggle right afterwards, among hundreds of other characters that are right there. Nick's so glad that you're here. And the only reason that I said yes to this is 1, because anything Lonnie says, I'll say yes to, but 2 is it is not every day that you meet someone who was a professional skateboarder and then becomes an academic philosopher.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So we have.
Even more weird. I was a professional rollerblader, slightly different, similar activities, but different means.
Yeah. So I mean, I think this is you have such a unique life story. I think for those listening and everyone that's exposed to anyone under 18 years of age, I think the question anybody would ask is, how do you get from professional skating to becoming an academic professor?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to thank FAN for having me. Organization puts a lot of work into these events and they do a lot to promote them. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to share my work with such a great organization, such a great group of people. So thanks to FAN for putting this all together. And thanks to you, Todd, for being willing to have this conversation with me. I really am grateful that you're the guy. But anyway, yeah. So the path. I mean, it's pretty unique in a lot of ways. And I grew up in this household that didn't really emphasize college a lot or even school, and I fell in love with skating at such an early age, and I lived right next to a skate park. So I got pretty good, like pretty quick. I was there just every day. And I dropped out of high school to pursue all these opportunities that I had in skating. So I was getting, paychecks and airplane tickets all over the world, and it was getting harder and harder to show up at PE class to run the mile. It even got sort of frustrating because I would miss school and then show up again, and my PE teacher would be like, "Oh, I saw you on ESPN last night. By the way, you're getting a D in this class because you haven't been here to do the activities that we're doing here." It's kind of like, can we maybe work something out? But it didn't really work out, so I dropped out. And to make a long story somewhat short, the second I dropped out, I found that I had a lot of passion for learning. I didn't really love high school, but when I dropped out and I was just traveling around a lot for competitions and tours for professional skating, I found that I just wanted to read and I wanted to learn, and I kind of just made my way through like a bunch of stuff, literature, world's religions. I studied music composition on my own. I just found out that I was kind of like this passionate autodidact, even though I didn't know that word. And eventually found my way to philosophy, feeling like this is the thing I really, really like. And every skater kind of reaches this point where they have to decide between kind of continuing along the professional path and like staying in the industry in other ways. Like you start a company, or you tour manage other skaters, or some people become graphic designers or videographers, and they also skate, so they kind of build their life within the industry. They're not just like competition winning youngsters their whole life. So I was sort of facing that decision, and my thought was, I love skating. I don't think I'm a business person in the sort of skate industry, so I can skate whenever I want. I should go to community college and study philosophy, which I've fallen in love with. So around 2021, that's what I did. And I didn't really ever look back. I was in community college for a few years and then went to UC Berkeley. I transferred, and I really benefited from the California community college system and the public education system here, because I didn't have that much money, didn't come from much money, but I was able to, with state and federal help, plus some of the money I earned from skating, just get through college. And then, yeah, I graduated Berkeley and felt like I hadn't done enough philosophy. I sort of wasn't finished. I felt like I still had a lot to learn. And so I thought, I had no other ideas. I mean, I really was not enterprising at all. My only other idea was to hang out in San Francisco, play my guitar. I really didn't. I only liked philosophy. So luckily I got into some good graduate schools, and the rest is sort of history.
Can I hit, because I'm glad you brought this up. I wasn't even going to reference this, but you mentioned the guitar. And so the guitar plays, and I don't want to give away too much in this beauty, how it comes into play, but it's sort of a character in the book itself, and it's buried in the middle. So let me flesh out, because you mentioned that you kind of traveling around with your guitar. Is there's sort of this trajectory of your guitar is one of the most important objects in your entire life when you're younger, and there you tell some amazing stories of how it taught you through beautiful empowering experiences, and then some real tragedies that if it wasn't for your guitar, you might not have been in those tragic situations that happened there. And it has like this bittersweet, nostalgic relationship you have with your guitar. And you wrote a book on awesomeness, the book of awesomeness and then you wrote this book on this beauty. And I'm wondering if there's some therapeutic element about this guitar that plays a role in your life as you think about these really meaningful concepts.
Yeah, that's a really deep question. I'm not surprised that you asked it. The guitar for me is, in a way, this symbol of being in touch with beauty. So it's really the topic of this beauty is, how do we stay in touch with the feeling of life's value? And over the course of the book, I developed the answer that it's by staying in touch with the value with aesthetic value. Maybe not the only way, but the way that I develop in the book, a way that I'm sort of convinced by, is to stay in touch with aesthetic value. And I think that one of the most profound ways that I've found in my life is sort of symbolized by the guitar. The moments that I've had playing music with a band, with writing songs, recording songs, listening to the songs I've recorded, and now sort of playing music for my son, now my two sons, and seeing this whole new life that the guitar has. It hangs now in my eldest son's room. So it plays this kind of symbolic role of, like, this is one of ways that I've found throughout my whole life of really keeping that element of beauty in my life, and keeping it strong, not just kind of, popping on music when I drive in the car, but actually, having a productive and creative side to it as well, where I'm actually writing songs and, playing them in the house, and teaching my children music and with it too.
So this is interesting because as the book ends, there's the chapter for your guitar is this was a big part of your identity. You stopped, and now you look at this as this captured so many moments of beauty in your life. What's not in the book is what you just added, which is the addendum chapter, is that
Yeah.
now with your two children that you're playing again and you're composing music that happens there. So
Yeah.
so I think there's some broad themes that I want to play with tonight. And so one is about with the guitar is you have elements of your identity that are changing over the course of time. And yours
Yeah.
has a little bit of kind of it has a full comes full circle where your guitar is playing a role with the next generation of Riggles with your two boys. But
Right.
the other one, but the other one is that your interests can change and ebb and flow over the course of time. And you sort of have this handbook. To me, it's like this practical handbook ready for the taking of how do you live a life with more awesomeness? And then how do you live a life with more beauty? And
Yeah.
I'm wondering about advice you have with your experience with the guitar where you stopped and you return back to it of like, what's the lesson to pass on to other people who maybe have old versions of themselves that they are nostalgic for and maybe they can grab back again and bring back into their lives and maybe not.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I think that different people have different skill sets to draw on that they've developed over time in the past and maybe, lost. And I think that one bit of advice might just be to think about the skill sets you currently have, and to what extent can those skills and those activities be made aesthetic in the way that I talk about in the book. I mean, so for example, I cook a lot, and sometimes it's super routine. I just kind of, it's an emergency, like the kids got to eat, my wife and I have to eat. I just sort of throw something together. I don't think about it much. But there's other modes in which I'm, some weeks maybe I'm just a lot more reflective and creative and thoughtful about it. I'm sure everyone sort of can relate to this to an extent. And I can make cooking part of my aesthetic life, or I can make it just this routine thing where there's not much difference between what I cook or, whether I cook or whether I grab takeout or something like that. So yeah, it's to reflect on the things that you have in your life already and whether those can be made, as it were, quote unquote, more awesome or more beautiful.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So you started off with the skills you have, and I thought about this when I was reading this beauty of the appreciation of being a white belt, of having really low skills. This is like your baseline, really deficit foundation, but you have lots of interests, but low levels of skill. Those are the two cells that you're in that happens there. In terms of how do you, from the beginning onward, when you can make a social comparison to other people and realize there are so many people that are better than you, and you can imagine so many versions of you that would actually be skilled and effortless, and there would be grace in your movements, but there aren't yet. How do you get to appreciate beauty and have this aesthetic sense of self that you're describing when you're at this low skills but strong level of interest and activity?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk a lot about two deeply important values in aesthetic life. And one of them is what I call individuality. And so that's the skilled thing. So your individuality in my view is the result of your exercise of choice over time in what to love in terms of aesthetic value. So a lot of us make a lot of these choices all the time. What do you laugh at? What do you put on TV in the evening? Do you take up piano or do you take up violin? So we can make these decisions in our lives. And as we do that over time, we cultivate a sensibility, a certain taste in piano music or violin music, a certain sense of humor, depending on what you sort of have exposed yourself to in terms of like comedy. But the other side of it, the other side of individuality, and I talk about this in both of the books actually, is in On Being Awesome, I call it the pure individuality, but in This Beauty, I call it aesthetic freedom or volitional openness. And so I think the answer to that question is, well, you can still engage in a really important part of aesthetic life by exercising your aesthetic freedom. And what that is, we all live, I mean, as adults, we all sort of have these entrenched habits and routines and a sort of deeply carved out sense of self. And that's a really good thing because it gives us control over our lives. It helps us be responsible to our jobs, to our friends and families, and so on. But it can also be like slightly oppressive, when you ever feel kind of like sick of yourself. I've been kind of feeling like that lately, just like for whatever reason, just like, oh, I need a jolt, my routines aren't bad, they're good. I'm healthy, I have a nice family and a professional life and stuff, but you can kind of feel like those grooves are too worn.
Yeah. Like these obsessive passions that kind of have taken over your life for years, decades.
Yeah. And so volitional openness is this kind of freedom, this kind of ability that I think we all have more or less to just break out of that and, explore something new, maybe a source of value that you've rejected in the past, or, whether that's like a group of people or an activity or a bar or a cafe or something, just kind of like to break out of those grooves, that sort of entrenched or routine sense of self, and engage with the value that's right in front of you, and not sort of color that value with your baggage, yourself.
Yeah. Let me play with this novelty thread, and instead of immediately asking you what is beauty, which I think is an important place to start with this conversation, let me tell you about two incidents that happened over the past 12 hours. And I'm curious about your thoughts about why or why not are they elements of beauty. So I was at a dinner party last night with the founder of the Major Pickleball Association. And while I was getting my dinner, there was a woman who was a little bit tipsy. And as she was collecting the salad at this dinner, she didn't notice that she was holding a beer on its side, and it was pouring beer out the entire time that she was putting salad on the plate. And so no one noticed it. So I ran onto my knees, like slid onto the floor, Michael Jackson style, and put a cup underneath her beer. And I was able to capture almost all of the beer without any embarrassment on her side. I just said, hey, instead of drinking it from the bottle, I've got a cup of the exact same beer that happens there. So in that novel occurrence, I think of the possibility of two themes that you bring up. One is the social opening, and one is beauty. And I'm wondering, an example like that where it just kind of emerges out of nowhere, where does that fit in terms of beauty and a social opening?
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, Todd, I have to say. Yeah, I mean, I think I talk about this example On Being Awesome, where, you're walking down the street and something happens where just like a pigeon just flies right past your head and almost like, takes your head off or something. Where that, and if you're walking by someone else and neither of you sort of comments on that or notices that, and you just kind of like walk by each other, there seems to be like, gosh, you just kind of missed something there. Like you could have, you could have like said something funny, or just like looked at each other like, holy moly, like what just happened? Like there could have been some kind of like, and I feel like, this occurrence is kind of like that, where you could have just let it go, or said something, like thoughtless, or not that you would have been rude, but you could imagine a lot of ways of calling that out in the social context would have been embarrassing for her. And so what you did was super awesome, because it created a social opening out of this event that was a mistake or maybe slightly embarrassing. And so that's awesome. I hope that she took it up.
She was a little bit hammered, so she didn't appreciate it.
I
So
see.
only by telling this
Yeah.
story does anyone know what I actually accomplished
What
yesterday.
actually happened. So you just
So-
had your own little moment of awesome. You sort of high-fived yourself. And
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I keep a journal every day of the 3 exceptional moments of each day, and so that I just kind of put that entry in, which is fine for me.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you tend to be you. I mean, just because you've led these 3 lives, right? So fatherhood, awesome skateboarder, philosophy professor. Now they've got a Venn diagram. They're all mixed together. It happens there. So you have a very rich approach to living. For not everyone has this level of extemporaneous thinking or speed of information processing in terms of figuring out
Mm.
what to do in the pigeon situation or in my beer spilling situation. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering, is this a trainable skill to actually recognize that there is an opportunity for awesomeness slash beauty? And then what's like for anyone that's has a deficit or a difficulty to kind of get there,
Yeah.
what are some training wheel strategies?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with beauty, and then talk a little bit about awesomeness, because awesomeness has a improvisational character that I think really does have this question, and or faces this question. Whereas like with beauty, I make the point in the book that everyone is living an aesthetic life already, whether they think about it or not. It's just happening. So we all grow up in an environment where aesthetic decisions are being made. You're listening to your parents' music, you're eating their food, they're dressing you for the longest time, they're making you take piano lessons or whatever. And you might even have in elementary school like art class, or like an art unit in third grade, and so all of these things are introducing you, acculturating you to aesthetic valuing, and you make decisions. It's funny, my 2.5-year-old, if we get in the car, he's already like, I don't like that song. Or I'll put on, he'll have requests, Dad, I want Runner, put on Runner, and then I'll play it, and he's like, you got to turn it up, it's not loud enough. Right? So he's already living this aesthetic life where aesthetic value is part of his life, and he has to make decisions about how to engage with it. And I think as we mature, we get a lot better at that. But just like with anything in our life, we can be more or less reflective about that aspect of life. And so one bit of advice there is just, how reflective are you? How much do you think about whether your aesthetic life can improve? Maybe there's beauty out there that you would be a lot better off engaging with. Maybe you engage with good stuff, but you could engage with it more or take it deeper, or do more to create aesthetic community around the things that you love, whether that's literature or pottery or gardening or whatever it might be, whatever your sort of source of beauty is. On the awesome side, I think it's harder because being awesome is being good at creating these social openings like you did, even though you sort of did it altruistically because no one was there to, as it were, no one was there to take it up. But that's, I think that there's training, as it were, that could go into it. But I think one thing is just having the concept of a social opening. That's one of the things I really learned when this book came out, was how happy people were to have that concept, that they feel like they'd been in touch with the kind of value that I talk about in the book, but just never had a sort of system to think about it with. And that the idea of a social opening alone helped them be more aware of when there was an opportunity or when it wasn't appropriate, or, those dynamics just came sort of to the forefront of their thought in a way that was helpful. So maybe the first step is just, checking the book out and seeing if it helps you in that way as well.
Oh, Nick, I mean, this is why I was so excited to talk about with you, because that term alone And I've been
Yeah.
doing relationship science for over 2 decades. That
Yeah.
term alone has completely altered my life over the past couple weeks. And I think for the
Oh,
long
wow.
haul.
Yeah.
The other example I was going to give over the past 24 hours of this concept of the social opening, which is so beautiful, is I walked into physical therapy for carpal tunnel syndrome symptoms.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
the not the physical therapist, but just the intern working there opened the door and looked at me and just said, "Well, did you probably had a breakfast of nails this morning? What was it?" And it was just that was his social opening reference. But
Uh-huh.
I picked it up quickly of just saying, you're pretty fit, you're pretty muscular. That happens. But instead of saying, "Oh, you have big biceps," he's like, "Oh, you must have had a breakfast of nails. What was it?" Now he asked in
Yeah.
question form too. So I
Yeah.
could just
Yeah.
ignore the question and say, "Hey, good to see you today." And you reference
Right.
kind of this kind of
Yeah.
what does that entail? Not in the singular moment, but if that's your default position of
Yeah.
multiple social situations, what is your life going to become? This is kind of, I think, where you get to a life that sucks. If you
Yeah.
regularly
Yeah.
not only ignore, but refuse someone's
Right.
social opening that happens
Yeah.
there. And so this
Yeah.
concept is so beautiful because I didn't look at it as he was trying to relate to me. I looked at it as he was trying to create, as Lonnie said, a bid for social connection. And no matter
Yeah.
what mood I was in, God, what kind of person do I want to be that says no, even if I'm not feeling it right there? It might come off
Yeah.
awkward or strange
Right.
or not entertaining or funny, but I don't want to leave him hanging. It comes in there.
Yeah.
And I wonder
Yeah.
about the
Totally.
pressure.
Yeah.
So that makes me think of the reversal, which is what about the pressure of being put in the position where someone creates a beautiful social opening, but you never know what the mood state is or the mental framework of the person who's walking into that social opening.
Yeah, well, I think this is where the skill can get honed. I mean, it's not always easy to know who the individuals are that you're inviting into these kind of, in some ways intimate or personal, right? It's about the sort of mutual appreciation of individuality. If that person said, "Looks like you had a breakfast of nails," and you said something dismissive or rude or just ignored it, or that would be, a kind of missed opportunity that when compounded, would be, I think, you would just be missing out on this big aspect of what makes life wonderful, which is this kind of this skill where we can put out these bids and create these social openings. But a big issue is when you don't have a read on someone, so you don't really know what kind of jokes they're going to laugh at, or what their interests are, or how they're going to respond to you. I mean, there's I talk a lot about vulnerability in towards the end of the book, where it takes kind of courage to put yourself out there in this way, in this kind of social opening way. And I think that the skill of kind of reading people not in generic terms, but in individual terms. I mean, that's the skill you need to be awesome, to create these social openings. So if you're treating everyone as just a generic customer, a generic
Right, they're
person walking down the street,
interchangeable cogs.
yeah, just to kind of, I mean, these social norms and roles and habits, that we need those to function well in society. But I do think that we can take it too far, and fail to see that all around us are these wonderful individual people who we can, invite into interaction in ways that are lovely and tasteful and enriching for both. So yeah, again, I mean, it takes this special skill of seeing the individuality in a person, and you can't always do that, but it helps that we have slightly more kind of generic ways of inviting people. I mean, if there's a beautiful sunset, I mean, everyone's kind of down to look at a beautiful sunset, and maybe someone doesn't notice it. You can point that out. There are ways to kind of be awesome with the thinner aspects of individuality.
And
And
maybe
it's
there's
not
a,
like,
oh
yeah,
yes, maybe there's a way of thinking of expanding the timeline a little bit of there's a social opening, there's how somebody responds, and then if there's a misfiring or a misfit, there's an opportunity for mea culpa, and then the other person gets to say why or why not it wasn't the right timing, and then you respond with compassion and active listening to whatever that is, and all of a sudden it's not the way the interaction was going to be awesome, but actually to skip the rungs of intimacy so quickly is this new varied form of actually being awesome. So it kind of can't go wrong as long as
Yeah,
the sequence keeps going until it's, its finale.
you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be sort of a one try and done, right? You can keep pushing, as it were, keep inviting the other people into this mode of interaction.
So Nick, I'm glad you hit the courage part of the book, because this is only one sentence in a 200+ page book, but it's beautiful. But right before that, if I remember correctly, because these are your words, not mine, you speak of, yes, there's something to be said about recognizing beauty like the sunset you just described it, and then pointing it out to a stranger next to you. Oh my God, look at this. Like, look at the color scheme, how different it is from everything I've seen over the past few weeks. There's that. But I think this is your three-prong approach, which is the response to beauty, such that there's imitation, there's imitation.
Oh yeah, self-expression and
sharing, imitation, sharing, self-expression, in that order. And when I read this, I had this thought, and I wanted to ask you about this. The imitation part, that's the first one. So we know with the white belts and young children or amateurs that imitation is the way that you develop your skill set. And I don't know how many writers have said that they sat down and they wrote a chapter from The Great Gatsby because they wanted to write a perfect chapter. And that's how they kind of had this feeling of, I am a writer. I can be a writer, even if it was an imitation. But it gets a very bad reputation in society. And I wonder if you have something more aspirational to say about this stage of responding to beauty.
Yeah, imitation has a kind of dark side, but it also has a really beautiful side. And the beautiful side is it's actually from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. His thought was that, if you try to come up with a philosophical theory of beauty, what do all beautiful things have in common? His thought was, you're not going to come up with anything. There's too many different things in the realm of beauty. There's, music that's totally varied in its beauty. There's Gothic churches, there's beautiful faces, there's jewelry. What do all these things have in common? It's hard to say. But he was like, look, one of the things that it seems like we could say is it's merited or it's warranted to respond to all beauty with this impulse to imitate it. And that can mean it can mean a lot of things. On the sort of bright side, it can mean, listening to that music or looking at the ocean and writing a poem in response, kind of imitating it in your own way, seeing someone in a beautiful outfit and thinking, oh, that inspires me to recreate it in my own way with my own wardrobe. I like to quote Leonard Cohen here, who said that a lot of his songs are just a response to the beauty he saw in the world. And it's like, wow, he wanted to respond to beauty with beauty. And often that's just imitation, it's not like you're just copying the thing, but it's sort of being inspired by it or using it as a positive model in your own aesthetic activities. The dark side is when you just copy other people. It's just pure sheepish imitation, maybe to fit in, or even, sometimes it's imitation in a kind of deceptive way where you're trying to pass off something as your own, but you're just kind of like, it's not really yours. But I think, like most things that are good, there are ways of going wrong with it and ways of going right. And I think a lot of imitation is something to be celebrated in aesthetic life. It's one of the engines of aesthetic life. I'm inspired by your words, by your look, by your music, and want to incorporate that, into my own words and looks and music. And I think if you look at the way aesthetic practices carry out. I mean, you see a lot of this, right?
Yeah, you
Imitation
see
that's not just copying.
the threads among creators and curators. Like if you kind of do the
Yeah,
deep dive and
yeah,
can we play with a few controversial in quotes ideas that kind of that inspired by your book?
of course,
With
yeah.
so with this imitation one, I'm sure, I mean, well, you're a professor, so you've been exposed to Chat GBT, and you've been exposed to
Yes.
probably I don't know what the software is where it creates these avatar images of you that are
Oh,
as
I've
like a
seen that. Yeah.
warrior and
Hmm.
in nature and robotic.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about artificial intelligence entering into the territory of aesthetic beauty and the aesthetic life?
Yeah. So I have mixed thoughts about this. When my book came out, a friend of mine sent me a chat bot with a chat bot response where the question was, write write 3 pages in the style of Nick Riggle about beauty and something or other. And like, it did an okay job. I mean, it was flawed in a lot of ways, but it was remarkable how well it did, given that it's just a chatbot. Um, I feel like the jury's out. I have mixed views. I'm worried about some things, excited about others. I think that if you look at the way that AI is being used for interior design, it's actually really, really cool. It can basically just build out a space and you can give it all kinds of weird instructions and it'll come up with,
Ooh,
kind
yeah.
of like a first pass draft, like a first idea, like, and then you can work with that, reject parts of it, accept others, modify it, whatever. That's kind of cool. I feel like that's pretty useful. I mean, it might put some people out of work, but I mean, I don't know. It seems like an interesting use of technology. On the other hand, using it to, I mean, copy essays, and I mean, maybe that's less aesthetic, but you know, I do sort of worry about its broader effects on culture. I guess when it comes to aesthetic stuff, so far, just kind of curious about its power. I feel like people can use it to good effect.
I think about how this intersects with Carol Dweck's and Carol Diener's concept of growth mindset, where the
Mm,
idea is one of the best ways of training people to learn or guiding people to learn is to focus on the effort and the progress, and not that you are definitively you're creative, you're intelligent,
yeah,
you're a quick thinker, as opposed to it's wow, I love the way that you produce these like very melodic paragraphs with rhythm and melody. It's kind of like
mm,
listening to the Talking Heads when I'm in terms of like as I hear your prose. And one of the things that comes to mind is when you immediately have a science fiction futuristic picture that's designed by AI or an essay, there's Carol Dweck's approach is gone. There's no growth element. It's just it wasn't
yeah,
there, and then boom, it just pops up from thin air as an output. And I wonder
yeah.
if that has a role in terms of altering people's beliefs that they have creative potential and beliefs that they have imaginative powers that they maybe not
Yeah.
have not tapped into yet.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. I mean, another aspect of it that I've thought about is related to this. I mean, these things are trained and they're trained on human products. So these image creators are trained on images that people made. They don't just come out of nothing, right? They've learned to create these images by processing information that other artists, human artists made, works that human artists made. Similarly with the texts that the chatbot creates. So I think there's something there where it's like, yeah, it's learning in a sense. There is some maybe growth that it has, but it's all dependent on this giant structure of human beings making art. And it's like we can't overlook that. Like that's a really important foundation that these robots are built on.
And maybe that piece is missing, the transparency about what the data set entails in terms of the
Mm,
flaws and foibles of actual human beings.
yeah.
You ready for controversy number two?
Yes.
So, and I was even gonna, I even was gonna avoid an example in on being awesome and not sucking, is your
Mhm.
first book, not the
Mhm.
actual title, is you had this great Louis C.K. bit about awesome possum. And
Oh, right. Yeah. At the end. Yeah.
yeah, and so I'll leave it for the readers to discover that for themselves. But it brought up a very popular kind of idea right now, which is what do we do when we love the aesthetic creation that someone has, but we have these very dark, loathing, disgust, disappointment reactions about the creator? And then how does
Yeah.
that fit it? So how can we how can we do a better job at disentangling these two so we can have, as your thesis is in This Beauty, have more of an aesthetic life, and in your first and your second book, have more awesomeness in your life? Like, what do we do with this disconnect between creative output?
Yeah. I think that a lot of a big part of aesthetic life is, what I call self-expression. And often when we're engaging with the works of other people, we're engaging with their expressive products. And part of what we connect to sometimes is the feeling that there's a real person sort of expressed in these works, someone that we want to sort of stay in touch with in terms of like we love their mind or we love their sensibility, or we're not just a fan, we're kind of like attached to this artist and their output. And so when we learn that the artist has some moral problem or is not a good person in one way or another, that can really mess with that relationship. And I think it's legitimate that it can mess with that relationship. I mean, it's hard to just divorce the moral from the aesthetic, especially when there's this self-expressive element that we're kind of connecting to in a lot of the works that we engage with. And then the other aspect is, I don't think aesthetic life can carry on in a deeply flourishing way if we just overlook all the moral stuff. We can flourish as an aesthetic community the most when we also flourish ethically. So I think there's always going to be a kind of foundation of broad, mutual respect, consent when it's needed, and moral recognition and concern. And when that broad sort of moral foundation is there, then aesthetic life can really flourish, I think, even more. So there's a kind of incentive there to not overlook the moral flaws that people have as artists.
Yeah, I think
But
you
I
do.
think,
Yeah.
it's going to be an individual decision how much you want to, sometimes it's really obvious. It's like, you shouldn't engage with this person's work. I mean, they're just moral monsters, but but in other cases, it's more complicated, and it's kind of up to you. And as someone who's living your own aesthetic life, I mean, is this person who has some morally questionable person, is this someone who you can create aesthetic community around? Is this someone whose works you really want to share with other people? And that's just kind of, I think that people will have to make those decisions on their own.
Yeah, there's this interesting cascading effect, because I'm imagining a downstream example where and I think you do a really good job of tackling aesthetics at the interface of morality. But let's say there's someone that doesn't hold that similar view and is kind of, listen, I can appreciate Michael Jackson's music and I don't even care what he looks like, much less what he does. The thing is, it moves me that happens there. And there's some level of being able, can you be a principled enough in your individuality that you can divorce yourself from the popular herd response, which is you shouldn't be listening to this music anymore, and be really attuned with, I'm going to be kind, fair, forgiving, graceful to everyone, but this music moves me and I can't ignore that. Or this comedian makes me laugh, and that is a autonomic response that I can't control that happens there. And maybe there's another level of beauty of that you could have this individuality and separate yourself from the pack.
Yeah, no, I think, individuality again is this this sort of product of making these discretionary choices about what to care about. And that's part of, you get to make those decisions. And I mean, there's lots of concerns that philosophers have talked about. Actually, there's a really nice book called Drawing the Line by Eric Hatala Mathis, where he talks a lot about the issues that come up with exactly these kinds of cases, Michael Jackson and Louis C.K. and so on, where there's questions about being complicit, where you're kind of as a member of a social group, signaling a certain lack of concern or a certain form of support, perhaps, where it doesn't matter what you decide. If you're blasting this music in your car, it's like you are sort of like complicit with something that's questionable in a way that you might not want to be, and so that's just the way that these sort of moral signals get sent. And so those are some of the complicated moral issues that come into aesthetic life.
Yeah, I like the complexity part. All right, can I go to controversy 3?
Yes.
So the thesis in This Beauty is really about the question, right? And it's really, I love the way you play this as a thread throughout the entire book. I mean, one of the things for those people that haven't read This Beauty is the book reminds me of Christopher Nolan's movie Inception, where there's a sequence where they enter people's dreams and try to find out their secrets, but they go within, to do this, they go in a dream, make that person dream within the dream, and go one further step to make, so it's a dream within a dream within a dream. And your writing has this quality for beauty, where you have the theme of beauty in life as the reason that we would consent to being alive, or not consent to being alive, but take advantage of this life we have. You have this poetic, rhythmic, beautiful prose, which is so uncommon for a philosopher or a nonfiction writer to capture. So it's actually, you can really just really enjoy and relish that. And then on top of that, the dream within a dream within a dream, you also bring up all these amazing writers, Wittgenstein, if I'm pronouncing it right, and Nietzsche, and Bernard Waller. Is that the British philosopher?
Williams, yeah.
Bernard Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And here are these beautiful writers, and you are engaging with such soft gloves and challenging these great treaties that in the course of history, and you're challenging them regularly. So the ability to have these levels is so powerful and so beautiful. So I want to ask you this question, which is that the question in This Beauty is, being that you haven't consented to this life, what can you do to have the most fulfillment in this one life you have? Your answer is beauty. And I wonder, what other alternative ideas have you considered or have been broached to you as an alternative to beauty for the reason for living?
Yeah, so that's like the deepest question. So I do say at the beginning, I don't know how many answers there are to the question, which is the question of why should you value this life that you didn't consent to live? I mean, this existence that you didn't consent to. You're just kind of like thrown into this fairly mysterious world, and there's kind of nothing you could have done about it. You just kind of wake up one day and realize, oh my gosh, I'm here. It's like troubling in a lot of ways, difficult in a lot of ways. Why should you value this thing that you didn't ask for, didn't consent to? And the thought throughout the book that I developed, thanks for saying that you liked the layered sort of aspect of the book. I worked really hard to make it that way. But over the course of the book, developed the idea that basically I don't think, philosophically speaking, you're going to have a direct answer. Why should you value this life? I mean, because this. And you think, okay, great. Now it's valuable. I'm good. I don't think there's going to be a direct answer, but what I like about aesthetic life as an answer is that although it doesn't directly give you the answer, life is valuable because God created you, or life is valuable because it just is. It's part of the fabric of reality that it is. Although it doesn't give you answers like that, it does give you answers in the form of beauty, where it's not a direct answer, but it's a kind of way of assenting to life, even though, you didn't choose to live it. So it's a way of saying, well, look, there's beauty here. I mean, look at this beautiful album, or look at this beautiful fashion designer, or look at this beautiful ocean. And in that moment, it's like, yeah, I didn't consent to this, but I'm okay with it, right? It's beautiful. It's beautiful enough for me to be in touch with this beauty, and to, per Wittgenstein, and per the sort of theory of beauty that I developed at the end of the book, it's enough to be in touch with this beauty and bring it into my life in a way that sort of makes it my own, so that I can share that with other people, and so they can do the same. And that's this idea that life is beautiful enough to bear repeating. Yeah. So
I mean, I have to tell you,
yeah.
it was, I have never thought of it before as being the answer to that question. And I am definitely convinced enough of, I will be meditating on this for the remainder of my years of like, hey, did Nick Riggle get this right? But
Yeah.
and every time, the weird thing is, every time you think about that, there will be something beautiful probably in the backdrop in that moment,
Yes.
like competing with your
Yes.
attention.
And then you can go, damn it, Nick, you win again. I mean, to wrap that up, I mean, I don't know. I really, truly, genuinely don't know how many answers there are to the question. This beauty develops one that I find so important that I wanted to write it in a way that my kids would appreciate and love, and that's why it's dedicated to my son Wolf. And so, maybe I'll write a book when I find out that there's a different answer that competes.
I love that. I love that.
Gentlemen, thanks for such a lively conversation. I really appreciate it. I know some people are sort of like, gosh, I haven't listened to a philosophy professor since I was in college. And is this for me on a cold January night? And I'm sure that those who have attended have found it to be just really fascinating. And Todd, hats off to you, because of course I'm sure you can make even a grocery list interesting to folks. So I appreciate the energy and the curiosity that you bring to your work. It's always really fabulous. So thank you. Nick was well served by your partnership here. There are a couple questions here. I'm going to start with just a define the terms thing, Nick. Arlene is asking, can you just kind of give a nutshell what you mean by a social opening?
Yeah, good. So a social opening is an opportunity. So it's an opportunity to break out of your everyday habits and norms and routines, or to break out of like whatever social role you're in. Suppose you're out ordering coffee, you're in the social role of being a customer, and everyone kind of plays that role the same. There's a kind of script that we all follow. And so an opportunity or a social opening is typically created by someone, and it's an opportunity to break out of that social role or that habit or that norm, and express your individuality in a way that invites the person or people to whom you're expressing your individuality to do the same. So if you're in the role of coffee shop customer, you might create a social opening by, instead of just playing out that normal script, cracking a joke or commenting on something in the store. But you have to be careful, because not every way of doing that actually creates a social opening. So, if the cashier asks you to, if you need anything else, and you say, how about $1 million? You haven't really created a social opening, because like every other dad is saying the same thing.
Right.
So
I'll be curious.
Anyway, there's kind of sensitivity.
I'll be curious, maybe in after hours, which I want to remind folks to, Anne-Marie has been posting in chat for everybody about how to come to after hours to ask your own questions and to kind of extend some of these things that maybe have started some trains of thought for you. There's in chat, we've been putting a link to buy a copy of This Beauty. Come join us at After Hours. We're going to start at 8:05 p.m. We're going to give these two gentlemen 5 minutes in between these two Zooms. Then it's a Zoom meeting. Your cameras are on. You can ask your own questions. Chat's two-way. It's very lively and very fun. And Todd is going to be joining us as a guest. So I assume it's going to be pretty fabulous. It's going to be the R-rated version of Fan. We'll take the PG rating out. I want to also note on that. I'm curious, and I'll ask this question in After Hours. I'd like to know, in terms of that social opening piece, how, if you have some strategies for people who are perhaps a little bit more introverted by nature, where it sounds like there's a little bit of initiative taking as you're describing it, that like you kind of gotta, step out or say something or act in some way. For some people who might dispositionally not find that particularly easy to do, just generally, and we'll look at maybe some strategies for that. The other question that I want to get to, there's several good ones, and I'm going to, I'm struck by Chris's question in particular, was the last one. It is a couple sentences, but I think you'll appreciate it. So Chris is asking, how do you square a very broad and flexible understanding of aesthetics that includes something like social openings or awesomeness, and the more formal and narrow understanding of aesthetics as art, music, creative work, etc.? What makes the former aesthetic for you in a way that is different and more powerful than a less consciously aesthetic way of approaching such an interaction? That is to say, for example, a more classic social psychological lens, especially for those who don't feel very creative and aren't artistically inclined.
Yeah, so I think that, traditionally in philosophical aesthetics, which is my expertise in philosophy, over the course of the 20th century, there's been a lot of emphasis on kind of maybe like the fine arts or something like that, aesthetic as involving kind of the highbrow or something like that. But in the last 20 years, maybe a little longer, the younger philosophers have been really unhappy with that way of thinking about things. It's been developing over maybe a little longer period, but these days we think of aesthetic value as inhering in all kinds of things, not just in paintings in a museum or in classical music or whatever, but like in fashion, in your garden, in your backyard, in sort of everyday life. And I think that this way of thinking about aesthetic value is just more true to the phenomenon. I mean, we can make aesthetic decisions almost every single day. I mean, do I put the book here or there? Do I put my glasses kind of like this or like this? Do I do my hair? These are all aesthetic actions because they're responsive to your judgments about what looks good or what sounds right or what feels good or what tastes good or what smells good. These are all aesthetic matters. And so I include the fine arts in my conception of the realm of aesthetic value, but I don't want to limit my way of thinking about beauty to those things, even though they can be extremely beautiful.
Okay.
And on the other comment, I mean, I guess I didn't really address the aspect of creativity and social.
I'm going to put some bumpers on you and give you 60 seconds. So you got a lightning round. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. It's maybe hard to be satisfying in a short time, but the thought is, as I talked about with Todd, I think that there are ways to kind of, have certain rules to follow, the sort of awesomeness rules or things you can keep in mind when you're living your aesthetic life to kind of remind you to tap into beauty. But those are in the book actually. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Todd, thank you so much. Nick, thank you so much. We really appreciate your service to the
Thank
fan.
you. Yeah,
Really
and thanks to Fan. Yeah,
Love
Thank you so
Fan,
much.
love you.
Yep.
big fan.
All right, so we're now at 8 o'clock exactly. We're going to close out this Zoom. We hope to welcome several of you, many of you, at After Hours, which will start in about 5 minutes from now. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at another fan event soon as well. Thank you so much.